Basically, folks, we're going to get into the mangroves here. I'm going to talk about how this project started, how I film it, how it works, what happens, who gets the footage, and the future of it. So real quick, for those that don't know, my name is Prabir Mehta. I've been, like Tim Schul said, been with the museum for about 10 years. You can find me on social media. I've also started a production and consulting company called The Great Big Everything, which is the organization that's kind of doing all of this documentation of all of these mangroves. And we work with a bunch of other folks around town, like Gather and Maymont, and we normally put on the Mozart Festival, though this year that had to be delayed due to public health concerns, of course. But today I'm going to talk to you about a special passion project of mine, which is the mangroves of southwestern Puerto Rico. 1,500 miles from here. But before we get into that, let's, if it's possible, Tim Schul, could we do a poll real quick? Let me see if I can do a poll real quick.
There we go.
There we go. All right, folks, have you been to Puerto Rico? I'm just wondering how many of you have and have not been. Oh, look at the results are coming in. Maybe you went for a destination wedding, or maybe there was a cruise boat that docked there for a few. Maybe you have family there. Maybe you're from there, or maybe you just like it there. It looks like a bulk, a bulk of you have not been, but that's cool. There's plenty of time in the future to see it. But yeah, let me for those that have not been, let me kind of go through a couple of items here. The basics, if you will. Here we are in Virginia, up at the top center of your screen, and down at the bottom right, you will find Puerto Rico. So we're headed to the Caribbean. This is the body of water that we're going to be spending most of our time in here. Oh, there we go. 53% of 65% have not been. All right, I highly recommend you check it out sometime. It's a beautiful place. So Justin, who is our astronomer and dome guru, made this for me. So we're leaving Virginia, we're leaving the Science Museum, and we're magically being transported and gently set down in the southwestern coast at this little fishing village called La Parguera. As you can see, it's a pretty small place. The population is around 2,000. It's just an absolutely beautiful place to go hang out, get some peace and quiet, and soak in some beautiful scenery. And if you are interested, you could get in the water and go see some really cool ecosystems, the mangroves. That's what is kind of jutting out of the water there. As you see some patches of canopy and land, those are the places that I'm talking about. Let's see. Let me go out a little further to show you the ones that I go to. I went here for the first time in 2014 because a friend of mine invited me down, and we went to visit their friend who lived in La Parguera, and therefore it was kind of, off the beaten path a little bit. It's about 3 hours from San Juan, which is where most people go. Though truly it's not difficult to get around, and it's just a beautiful island all over the place. I just happened to go here as for my first trip, and they knew that I really enjoyed nature-related things and science-related things, and they knew I loved using cameras, so they said, hey, you want to see something that your camera's never seen before? And I said, of course. So we went to this patch right here, which we nicknamed Treasure Island, because unfortunately we found a lot of trash there. And then these two we called the Super Nursery. And then this kind of chain right here, this little archipelago here, is this is the Enrique mangrove down here. And all of these are kind of the more touristy ones where people can just get boats and quickly get to them for, a evening hang with the family, or if you just need a midday retreat in a quiet place. So not a lot of people go to these, and a lot of people go to these. So that will factor into things very shortly. This is the actual Treasure Island mangrove. So this is the first one that I go to, and this is the first one I went to in 2014, and absolutely fell in love with it, and then started chatting with some of the folks that are doing research in that area because of social media and my general interest with the science community, and the connections that I've been able to make after being involved with the museum and with VPM and WCB and such over the years. So I was able to quickly reach out to some folks and say, hey, you know, I noticed no one was out there with cameras. I noticed that you guys have a pretty busy schedule yourselves and not a lot of, I can't seem to find a lot of documentation online about it. Can I help? And they said, sure. So thus began my fascination with documenting this area. I learned a lot about mangroves. For example, they obviously protect the coast. I mean, that's a vital function they play. We'll get some of the scientists to speak on it later. We actually filmed an entire documentary in 2019 regarding this project, and we got to interview some of the scientists. I'll share those clips in a second, but they'll kind of reiterate this stuff. You know, they protect the coast, they sequester a lot of carbon, and they're home to myriads of species all over the world. Mangroves are being lost at 4 times faster a rate than any land-based forest or coral reefs. And 40% of the mangroves around the world have been lost in the last 3 decades. So knowing that this was a tourist destination for Puerto Ricans and for folks coming to Puerto Rico, and knowing that we're looking at a kind of fragile ecosystem, I thought it would be wise to start turning the camera on. And just being out there is really beautiful. You know, you're away from it. The breeze feels great. The sun feels great. These are time lapses I've done of the Enrique patch. And as cool as they are on top, once you get in the water is where the magic really turns on. This footage is from 2016, and this is the Enrique mangrove. This is a bunch of clupeids, little fish. Millions of them use these mangroves as their nursery because mangroves are nurseries for little fish, and it's such a vital part of life. The cycle of life begins here for a lot of them, and it's such an important thing to not be missing in the ecosystem. So I immediately fell in love with this idea of documenting this ecosystem and making the footage available to the researchers that are working on these areas down there. And I also wanted to create a long-term piece. You know, I value so much about what we can learn from just captured photos and such. National Geographic actually just did a wonderful piece on, I believe they just hit I can't remember the exact milestone they just hit, but they just hit a cool milestone with the amount of new species captured just based on cameras, just based on photos. Plus, this is kind of a neat way to see a system that's changing because it is, you know, in a very active hurricane area. I mean, Hurricane Maria certainly had an impact on this region. And there are political, economic, and cultural changes happening, and the tourism industry is still, you know, interested in existing in Puerto Rico. And there's an already existing, amazing, beautiful population there. There are a lot of factors that could impact this ecosystem. So the Red Roots Project was born in my mind, but don't take my word for it. Let's see what some of the other researchers there have to say as well.
The mangroves are pretty extensive down in La Parguera, and you'll notice just if you're in a small boat kind of driving in between the mangroves versus being on the outside of the mangroves that they really do reduce the amount of wind that kind of comes through the area. And that's really important in terms of having hurricanes come through or storms come through. The mangroves are critical to protecting the coastal environment there.
This community in La Parguera had some protection because they have, you know, mangrove canals and these reefs out here and seagrasses that all dissipate wave energy.
So clips from the documentary that Skinny Dipper Studios made with us. And that was one of the reasons why mangroves are important, but then there's also a biological ecosystem reason.
A lot of fish use all of these ecosystems through their phase of life, their life cycle. So as juveniles, like the really important ones like the groupers will use the mangrove roots and seagrasses as a recruitment area or a juvenile area, and then when they get bigger, then they migrate to the coral reefs. So they're all interconnected.
So that interconnectivity is super important. You know, you have to have the seagrass, the mangrove, the patch reef, the coral, and then the open ocean for these fish to have their full life cycles. For many fish, not for all fish, but for many fish, that's a thing. And so removing one of them could be detrimental. So what would remove that? Well, there is the impact of humans.
I've just been coming here since I was about 7 or 8. We would come out in boats here. We would do a lot of fishing, but it was very, very pristine.
Now, all of a sudden, all these boats that come, because before the tourism stayed in San Juan, in the hotels, they wouldn't go out. Now the young people, like you, like to come through the island, which is great.
So I don't think the information of biodiversity and how important these ecosystems are, I don't think there's a connection there. I think that's lost with some of the, not all, but with some of the people that do come and enjoy these resources.
Yeah, I'm just saying, make sure that these beautiful areas are not impacted, because we're dependent on them for actually our livelihood. Puerto Rico depends a lot on tourism.
Yeah, so human impact in that region is, you know, a real threat, because there aren't that many things there infrastructurally set up to prevent it. Like, there's no staff that sits at the mangroves making sure people properly dispose of their waste or whatever. So it is kind of self-policed to a degree. But I wanted to document that change as we went. So that kind of is the birth of the project, so to speak. And then I was going to dive into the filming stuff, unless, Timshel, if there's anything that we need to hit before that.
One question that came up while you were talking, Prabir, is how has any of the wildlife gotten destroyed by climate change? Has climate change had an impact on some of the things that you've looked at?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. Everybody that's studying there says it has, and they've been there for a lot longer than I have. I've been doing this trip for 7 years. And in the 7 years, I haven't noticed anything that I have filmed that's like a dead giveaway, you know, but then again, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm filming this for the experts to be able to process and review. I think we're looking at a longer change, a longer time span, though. This will come up at the end of I'll tell you what, I will bring this up at the end of this presentation, because there is absolutely something that I did notice. And I don't know if that's a climate related thing, or if it's something else, or if it's a fluke or whatever, but I think whatever the changes are will be felt, I think, across the entire system, because the temperature of the ocean is going to be so vital for how all these species have evolved over, you know, thousands and millions of years, that changing the temperature rapidly would have a drastic impact on how ecosystems function in general. So I haven't seen it yet, but I intend to keep filming. And if any of the footage, you know, ends up helping the researchers in that area become aware of something, then, you know, that would be a wonderful contribution that I hope could be made possible. But I don't know. I simply I shoot the camera. I shoot things with my camera. But I will come back to that point. That's an excellent question. My hunch is there are already changes happening that maybe aren't being seen yet, because there just aren't that many people down there filming all the time. There just really aren't that many people down there, period. A lot of the footage that I'm about to show you, I was the only person there, or me and my team were the only people there. And, you know, no one around for days, basically. So look, if it's are there any other questions?
I have one more that might be a good one to answer now.
Sure.
One, they were asking about should Puerto Rico limit the amount of people playing in the water? Is walking around and boating detrimental to the fish nursery?
Well, you know, that's an excellent question. And again, you know, I'm not a Puerto Rican, and that would be a decision that I think the Puerto Rican community and citizens should make on their own. and I think they have the best intentions, and I think they truly love their environment, as you can see on some of the clips that I've shown. And I think they will do everything they can to protect their natural resources because they're aware of the beauty and bounty that it brings them. Puerto Ricans, though, may not be the exclusive problem. I mean, you know, there are still cruise boats that come in and bring thousands upon thousands of people from all over the world. And plus there's also the, you know, we live in a globalized world, so there is shipping and there are cars and there are things like that that we can't attribute to a single populace. But I think that the folks who live there, the citizens, do cherish their environments and they do as good a job as they can. You know, some maybe not as well as others, but I don't know. That's a decision I think that they would need to make. And again, if it's based on evidence of a deteriorating system and steps being needed to take in, then hopefully the researchers will be able to work with the folks that govern those areas and make the right decisions for the health of the entire ecosystem and island as a whole. Anything else? No? Okay. Then I will continue on here with the filming process. Okay, so let's see, the filming process. You do need a boat to get out there. We do everything based on GPS coordinates. This is my last trip in March, actually, just a few months ago. A couple of extra people came because I was not only filming, but I was also there to celebrate a birthday. So some of my friends joined me this time. It was very nice. And you also need gloves because it's rare that something happens, but there are some things that could potentially hurt you, and you want to be able to put your hand down and stand up. And you know, if something's coming your way, your hands are very important. So covering your hands is pretty vital. A lot of invertebrates that could cause some nasty stings in that area. You got sea cucumbers, you got jellyfish, urchins, and then that yellow growth you see on the left side, bottom left of your screen, that looks like coral. It's called fire coral, but it's actually more of a like jellyfish kind of thing. And there's the sting that it can leave you. That is from that's from this year as well. So that's a fresh sting that my partner Katie had. It's a constellation of pain. I highly advise you stay away from anything that looks like it could sting you. Most things you should leave alone anyway. You shouldn't be touching anything down there. Sometimes we have some technical issues. So this is the Dica pack that I use to submerge my Canon 5D in. But on this particular trip, the airline company lost our tripod and stand, and therefore we had to kind of makeshift one. So I took the snorkel goggles, flipped them backwards so that the strap was kind of straddling the part of the lens that I really needed to clear. And then we were actually able to stick an oar through this part. And it turned into our stabilizing tripod for this shot. So that kind of stuff happens periodically. On this last trip also, we had a slight GoPro malfunction, but a hairpin and a hairband came in very handy, and we were able to get tons of awesome footage because of that. So most of the footage kind of ends up looking like this. It's the ocean, you know, there are currents there, and it's not easy to swim or walk or anything in that region. In fact, after a couple of hours of filming, you feel like you've spent a day at the gym, which I actually enjoy. I love that. But so most of the footage looks kind of like this. But occasionally you strike gold with, see, this is just not going anywhere. But occasionally you strike gold and you get things like this. That's a that little red fish there is a squirrel fish. It was the first time that I have filmed squirrel fish in this area. That doesn't mean it's the first time they were there. They're usually there. I just had never gotten them before. That's a spotlight parrotfish that just swam by. And then here we have the usual collection of, you know, the normal fish. You see the grunts and such. But yeah, I saw the squirrel fish kind of all over the footage this time. And again, I just kind of report all these things. This is a inshore lizardfish. Pretty cool. It submerges itself in the sand to attack predators. It is very fast. This is a Cassiopeia jellyfish. It's an upside-down jellyfish that allows for vegetation to grow, which it kind of feeds off its energy. And it'll sting you, so we saw our first stingray this time as well. It's rare that they're seen in this part of the reef, but there it is. Pretty cool. Of course, there's plenty of long needle urchins. I actually got one in my leg this time. Not a great feeling. And this kind of just shows you the density of the fish in this particular area. And this is all ocean current kind of doing its thing. It's very hard to stabilize shots. So it's rare that any of these motion shots come in handy. I just think they're cool because they show kind of the, big picture of it all here instead of a stationary shot. The stationary shots are primarily what the researchers want. Any questions there before I jump into the future?
I have a whole bunch more questions, but
oh boy, okay.
So I had a question about the filming equipment.
Yeah, go for it.
Does it damage anything in the mangroves, or are there protective measures against that?
I mean, we don't leave anything in the mangroves at all. So we basically have gear that has been cleaned. We go into the water, we film things, and then we take everything with us. In fact, when we find trash, we also take that with us. We try to clean up the reefs and the mangrove patches anytime anything's visible to us. So there's no real damage being done. I mean, in fact, the folks that we've sent the footage to really encourage us to kind of leave the cameras down there for as long as possible. That way you can kind of get out of the way. You can kind of let the, life resume, let it go back to normal, because just being there is a disturbance. So I don't think, from what I understand, I don't believe there's any damage from the physical equipment being there. It's just important to make sure that, you take everything with you. And I personally don't use sunscreen anymore. I just put on a long sleeve shirt now, because I just, why bring one more chemical element into an environment if you don't need to? And luckily the shade from the mangroves plus the shirt actually does a pretty good job. And I guess I have a little bit of an advantage by being Indian, but that's neither here nor there. Any other questions?
A couple of questions about both hurricanes and earthquakes, and different people asking what types of impact they might have on the mangroves.
Yeah, actually, so one thing that was really interesting to me, I went in 2017 and in 2018, so straddling when Hurricane Maria hit. And of course, the effects were devastating for businesses. And I did notice that a lot of roadways and a lot of just power infrastructure, a lot of stuff was still being rebuilt. And, that community is just so resilient that you could tell that they were working really hard to rebuild everything, but, they were still just the nicest people in the world, and so ready to share, just time with people. It's such a lovely place to be. I did notice one thing in terms of the mangroves, though, is that after Hurricane Maria, it looked like all the trash got wiped out. It looked like something kind of, just shook the trash out of the mangroves, basically. It would be normal to kind of look in there and find some stuff every now and then, but I talked with the folks who do the boat rentals and a couple of other folks that are divers in the area, and of course the scientists that you saw on camera there, and everybody kind of said that the hurricane was devastating for humans, and then at an environmental capacity, number one, the mangroves absolutely helped the southwestern coast of Puerto Rico, because La Parguera, for instance, didn't have hardly the amount of damage that other places did. And that's because they have this, natural defense to these strong winds and storm surges. So the hurricane kind of, and also the mangroves have evolved to be there, over such a long time that, of course, they're going to withstand the hurricane. That's a part of their, genetic history. So they seem to do okay, but I would say the damage was primarily more, from what I saw, was more from human-related things. So that was one thing. Now, in terms of the earthquake, I don't know. I've talked to some folks very briefly about it, and the shot you saw of the stingray actually and the red squirrelfish being in the 2020 footage exclusively and nowhere else. That was one of the things I flagged and I sent to the researchers, and I said, "Hey, does this mean anything?" And they said basically it couldn't, but we would just need way more documentation and study on it. But it's good for them to know that at least at that time there's proof that these things were there, and then they see them and they continue to document it. So it's kind of these answers they take a while to kind of figure out, and it takes a lot of stuff to answer them. It's not just a light switch that an event happens and then the next day you have an answer for everything. Granted, it's been a while, but I think it'll still take a little more time. And now we're also adding in this global pandemic into the mix where, I'm not sure who's on the island right now. I don't know which researchers are there, or if they all came back to be stateside, or if they went back to whatever part of the world they're in. So that's another question that, will need to be answered to answer your question, I guess. So yeah, it's a continuing story, and if any of this footage again helps them answer it, then cool. That's the idea.
All right, I'm going to save some of the rest of the questions and let you continue.
Cool. Okay. Well, so the future of the Red Roots project is pretty simple. It's going to continue because look, I think these types of issues, the stresses that La Parguera's mangroves are feeling, will only continue while we do have a global pandemic. This is today on Kayak. It was $154 for a round trip. I'm not suggesting anyone should go right now. Now is the worst time to go and travel and put yourself at harm and potentially spread something that could harm others. But at some point, people will travel to Puerto Rico again, and these stresses will continue. So the project will continue. Hurricane season will continue. This is I believe this was updated just a couple of days ago, or I believe it's from a couple of days ago, but they're predicting a above normal hurricane season. So what will that mean? I don't know. And again, it may not mean anything for the mangroves, but it might mean that the folks who are there to take photos might be drastically reduced, and we're losing the human power of documenting these ecosystems even more that way. Or who knows? I mean, again, it's just another dynamic variable in a very dynamic ecosystem. And then also Puerto Rico last year reported that its tourism revenue had hit record numbers. This is one source that I couldn't find all the other sources for it, but tourism is definitely a thing. People are, if you go to San Juan, you will see a lot of people, and they're slowly leaving San Juan and venturing into other places, just like I did. So, tourism will be a factor to consider in the years to come as well. So here's what I was going to say earlier about the climate change question. I don't know if I've caught anything that anyone can, attribute any kind of climate related thing to, but while putting together this presentation, I did find something really, really interesting. 2014, there were 2 trips. 2015, there were 2 trips. 2016 and 2017, there were one trip each. In all of those trips, this starfish was visible at the mangrove patches. But after that, I have not seen it on any of the trips I've been on. So 2018, 2019, and 2020 were all starfish free. Now, it could be a complete fluke. It could be that I just wasn't there the day they were there. It could be that, they have shifted to another mangrove system altogether, but even that would be interesting to know why and what's causing that. So this is one of the things that I sent over to one of the researchers that you saw earlier in the clip. And she actually said, interesting, let me look into that. So it's just, again, it might be nothing, it might be something, but I'm glad that I have the collection of photos to share with folks that might have an interest in learning more about that entire ecosystem. So that's, that's one of the changes that I've seen. Again, that's only based on a few trips, and it's such a small kind of window, an annual snapshot. So I don't know if we can count that as the most solid evidence to stand on, but, perhaps after 50, 60 years of doing this, I hope we might be able to see some greater trends. And in the meantime, if we can help the researchers with any of that footage, and they've used it to win grants and stuff as well to continue their work. So it can be used in a myriad of ways. I'm happy to offer my services to them to make sure that this environment gets some sort of care as it grows and evolves with the rest of the world. So that's kind of what I got. It's called the Red Roots Project. You can go to thegreatbigeverything.com and see more on that. Plus, you can look at some of the footage yourself there. Feel free to follow me on social. Follow the Great Big Everything on social, and of course I will be making lots of fun stuff happen with the museum all the time, so tune in at the Science Museum of Virginia. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, I've got a few more. One question we just got was, do you always go the same time of year?
Yes. Okay, that's an excellent question. So I do go as close to the first week of March as possible because that's my birthday, but that kind of gives me a week to aim at and plan for, and I often take other people with me, so it requires a fair amount of planning. So yeah, it's usually in that time frame. Now in 2014 and 2015, I had the insane luxury of being able to go twice in 1 year, in which case I went in January and in March. So I was able to go during, when it's cold here, basically. It's about the same time, but I try to aim for the first week of March for every visit. Yes.
Another question goes back to the sunscreen when you're talking about, the sunscreen's impact on reefs and things like that. Somebody asked about, are there types of sunscreen that you can use?
Yes, there are, and they are expensive, like all good things. I don't know any brands offhand, but you could do a search for them, and there are some that are deemed environmentally more friendly. Now, are they? I don't know if they actually are or not. I haven't researched it, but I do know that when you go to La Parguera and you go to their corner market, they have one type of sunscreen, and it's not the kind that's expensive, and therefore it's a lot. It's a lot easier for me to sleep at night by just putting on a long sleeve shirt and letting the mangrove canopy do the rest. I have gotten burnt in Puerto Rico before, but most of the times it's because I was, trying to be tough on a beach to impress somebody, and it ended up with me impressing nobody.
I have two related questions here. One is
on impressing people.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's exactly what they're asking about. This one's about the species in the mangrove.
Sure.
Somebody asked about approximately how many different species are using the mangroves, and at the same time, somebody asked how many species of fish do you think you yourself have documented?
Cool, great questions. Dr. Eugene Maracas is a good friend of mine, and he used to be he was the head scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia up until last year when he retired. And Dr. Maracas and I go through this footage. It's a really fun opportunity to hang with him. First of all, I just love the guy, but he also knows every fish ever, and it's freaky. Like, you can ask him, hey, what's that tail? And he'll be like, oh yeah, that's the schoolmaster, he'll just go into it. I have a catalog going. I think I don't have it on me. I didn't look at it right before this, but I think I'm up to something like 40 some species myself. And every year a couple more get added, but that's specifically fish. So, if I were to add in things like the tube sponges and the pelicans and the crabs and the, little flying critters, the whatever dragonflies, and there's just so many there's so many species of invertebrates in that area. I don't even know how many I have, but there are hundreds. I mean, it's a huge ecosystem. They share the Caribbean, which, and effectively the Atlantic as well. So you get a lot. I mean, there's sharks there. There are stingray. There are dolphins in the area. There's a lot of stuff there. But I think I'm in the 40-ish range for fish species that one of the teams of researchers is specifically trying to get information on. So I think I answered those questions.
I think so.
Okay, all right.
And Dr. Maracas is on the call, so
Hey.
He's typed in the chat that there's over 750 marine fishes around Puerto Rico.
There you go. See, as I said, Dr. Maracas is the expert on all things. I mean, like, he is my. If you have more questions for me about fish, I'll just defer them to him. Hey, Gene, what's up?
I don't want to keep everybody too long, but I had another question was asking about, and maybe this will be our last one. Do you have, well, we have a couple of asking Prabir his favorites. One was your favorite mangrove areas that you've ever visited, and what's your favorite fish?
What's my favorite fish? Right now, I have to say the one that intrigues me the most is that red squirrelfish, because I think it's weird how every person I've talked to has said, yeah, they're all over the mangroves, yet for some reason 2020 is the first time they ended up on camera. So that one really fascinates me. Plus it looks wicked. It's got these big black eyes, it's got this like striped body with this bright red coloration, and then it moves and glides a little differently than the other fish. So that one to me is particularly intriguing. The fire coral I find fascinating because it's got such a strong defense. It'll mess you up, but it's all over the place too. So you got to be careful. So I would say I have a lot of respect for fire coral just by seeing how it's kind of, it's keeping a good defense over the system. If you think about it, it keeps us from getting in there sometimes. And then my favorite mangrove experience, the first time was just, like I said, was magical. The very first time I put my head underwater, it was just, all these fish, and it kind of just like stirred something up within me. And now every time I go, I kind of get a little bit of that feeling back every time I put my head down and see that first collection of fish. It's super cool to see a stingray. That's fun. Again, I'd never seen that in this area before. They're not in that area a lot, but they do show up from time to time. So there's that. They're kind of found in higher concentrations around the areas. I've seen them at other beaches and such, but not in that particular spot before. But again, they might be there every other day that I'm not there. So, it's just taking it as you go. I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite. That's a tough one.
All right. Well, Prabir, thank you so much for joining us today for Lunch Break Science and answering all of our questions. Next week's talk on Wednesday is June 3rd. Is all about the salty frog, exploring salt tolerance, sea level rise, and citizen science. So we hope you can join us then. And again, if you'd like to support the museum and help us continue to do these, you can support us at the link in the text. And we hope to see you again. Have a nice afternoon. Stay safe and healthy, everybody.